Pay close attention to what just happened. Because in the last 72 hours, the most powerful nation on earth walked up to its neighbor, knocked on the door, and said, "Come back. Let's go back to the way things were." And that neighbor, a country that has been America's loyal friend for over 150 years, looked them straight in the eye and said, "No, not, let's discuss it." Oh, not, "We appreciate the offer." Not, "We need time to consider." Just, no. And the man who said it, he wasn't a general, he wasn't a revolutionary. He was a central banker from Edmonton, Alberta, who once ran the Bank of England, now standing at a podium in Ottawa with the quiet, cold, unshakable calm of a man who has already done the math. Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada. And his message to Washington was delivered not with a raised voice or a clenched fist, but with something far more dangerous to those in power: pure surgical composure. We are not sitting here taking notes. We are not taking instruction from the United States. If you think this is just a squabble about dairy prices and liquor shelves, you have missed the entire story. What is happening right now between Canada and the United States is one of the most consequential shifts in Western geopolitics since the end of the Cold War. And it is happening fast. And today, we are breaking this apart, piece by piece, until you understand exactly what is at stake, who holds the cards, and why this moment will echo for decades. Let's get into it. To understand what Carney just rejected, we need to be precise about what Washington actually asked for. Because this isn't just a story about trade, it's a story about power, humiliation, and the weaponization of economic dependency. Here's the timeline of events as they unfolded. It started on April 17th, 2026, when U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick took the stage at the Semaphore World Economy Summit in Washington, D.C. And what came out of his mouth was not diplomacy. It was contempt. He mocked Canada's former chief trade negotiator, Steve Verhul, who had suggested that time was on Canada's side in these negotiations, that the longer the trade war dragged on, the more domestic pressure would mount on Washington. Lutnick's response? That is, like, the worst strategy I've ever heard. They suck. Look, we are a $30 trillion economy. A Commerce Department spokesperson later tried to clean that up, saying Lutnick was describing how, in their words, Canada sucks off of our $30 trillion economy. The clarification somehow made it worse, but Lutnick wasn't done. He then turned his fire directly onto Prime Minister Carney himself. Carney has a problem with us. He gets on a plane and he goes to China. Does he think the Chinese economy is going to buy his stuff? China is entirely an export-driven economy. So what did he do? Parliament Hill. A journalist asks Carney directly, "The Americans are saying this isn't really a negotiation. They're laying out what they need Canada to do, and Canada isn't meeting them. So what's the game plan?" And here is what separates Mark Carney from virtually every other leader in this situation. He didn't blink, he didn't pivot, he didn't send a spokesperson. He looked the camera dead in the eye and said it plainly. "We are not sitting here taking notes. We are not taking instruction from the United States." And then, and this is the part that should be played in every foreign policy classroom in the world, he stated his position. Second fastest G7 economy, best fiscal position. 20 new trade deals signed while Washington was busy issuing demands. That's a position. Let's take those three statements apart, because they are not boasts. They are strategic weapons. Second fastest growing G7 economy, in the middle of a trade war, with its largest trading partner imposing tariffs at Great Depression-era levels. Canada's economy has not just survived, it has outperformed most of the Western world. That matters because it destroys the central argument Washington has been using, that Canada needs America to survive. The data disagrees. Best fiscal position. Canada enters this fight with a stronger balance sheet than the United States. The U.S. is heading into what many economists call a stagflation-light scenario. GDP growth running below trend while inflation stays uncomfortably high. Canada, meanwhile, has maintained fiscal discipline that gives it room to absorb pain and wait. And waiting, in a negotiation, is its own form of power. 20 new trade deals on 4 continents. This is the most devastating line, because it answers the question that Washington never thought it would have to face. What if Canada actually finds other customers? While the Trump administration was issuing demands and insults, Carney was in Jakarta, in Abu Dhabi, in London, in Beijing, signing deals, building relationships, constructing a parallel trade architecture that doesn't require American permission. But Carney wasn't finished. He was asked about the alcohol dispute, the provincial bans on American liquor that Washington has been waving like a grievance flag, and he responded with something brilliant in its precision. He said the tariffs on Canadian steel at 50%, aluminum at 50%, automobiles at 25%, forest products. Those are more than irritants. Those are violations of an existing trade deal. That is the law, broken. The liquor shelf decisions, those are made by provincial liquor boards. sovereign, democratically accountable bodies, responding to the choices of their constituents. The message underneath that answer was unmistakable. You violated our trade agreement first. You don't get to lecture us about irritants. And then Carney said something that will likely be quoted long after this particular crisis is resolved. A journalist pressed him, "Is this a normal negotiation?" And Carney, in his perfectly calibrated way, said, "What do you think rupture means?" Rupture means things aren't normal. Rupture. His word. The same word he used at Davos to describe the fracturing of the rules-based international order. He's not pretending this is a routine NAFTA squabble. He's calling it what it is, a structural break in the relationship between two countries, and refusing to pretend otherwise just to make the optics comfortable. And then the most personal, the most political, and perhaps the most important line of the entire exchange. That sentence is 4 years of Canadian political humiliation answered in one breath. Now, I want to take a step back from the theater of press conferences and insults and ask the harder question. Is Carney actually right? Does Canada have genuine leverage here? Or is this confident posturing from a country that, in the cold arithmetic of global power, simply cannot win against a $30 trillion adversary? The answer is more leverage than Washington wants to admit. And Washington's anger is, itself, the proof. Think about this carefully. If Canada truly had no cards, if it was purely at America's mercy, there would be no anger in Washington. There would be no Lutnick going on television to mock a foreign leader. There would be no entry fee demand. You don't demand an entry fee from someone who has no other door to walk through. The anger is the tell. It means Canada found another door. Let's map the actual leverage because it's considerable. Canada is the top trading partner for more than 30 U.S. states, not 5 states, not 10, 30. That's not an abstraction to her constituents. That's empty parking lots and closed restaurants. Energy. Canada supplies the United States with oil. America does not produce enough oil to replace what it gets from Canada. That is geography. It is physics. It cannot be tariffed away. Critical minerals. Canada possesses aluminum for fighter jets, tungsten for armor-piercing equipment, uranium, potash, rare earths, the materials that an America-first military-industrial complex quite literally cannot build its arsenal without. And then there is the USMCA itself, the agreement that Trump signed, the one he's now calling irrelevant. Under the current framework, 90% of Canadian goods have been shielded from the worst tariff impacts. Trump knows this, which is why he calls USMCA irrelevant rather than terminating it, which is why the entry fee is a demand rather than an ultimatum. There's a difference. An ultimatum is what you deliver when you're prepared to follow through. A demand is what you make when you're trying to get something without paying the cost of actually crossing the line. Carney read that distinction, and he exploited it. Of everything in this standoff, nothing infuriates Washington more than Canada's China pivot. And the fury is disproportionate, which means it's about something deeper than canola seeds and electric vehicles. Let me explain what I mean. Carney's government struck a deal with Beijing. 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles enter Canada at a dramatically reduced tariff rate, down from 100% to 1%. In return, China dropped its tariffs on Canadian canola seed from 84% to around 15%, and removed levies on Canadian canola meal, lobsters, crab, and peas. China also opened visa-free travel for Canadian citizens. Lutnick's public reaction? Is this nuts? But here's what Lutnick is really saying when he asks that question. He is saying Canada is supposed to choose. It is supposed to remain in America's economic orbit, accept American terms, and not seek alternatives. The very act of Canada successfully finding another trading partner, even in a limited, carefully managed way, is a violation of the unspoken rule that Canada exists as part of America's economic sphere of influence. Carney's strategic logic is coldly rational. If America weaponizes trade, Canada must find new buyers. Canada aims to increase its exports to China by 50% by 2030. China, whatever its many flaws and genuine risks, has agreed to buy Canadian goods. That transaction is real. The canola is flowing. The lobsters are being shipped. Is this risky? Absolutely. China is not a benign actor. The Hogue Inquiry, Canada's own investigation into foreign interference, concluded that China remains the most active perpetrator of interference, targeting Canada's democratic institutions. Threading the needle between trading with China and defending against Chinese interference is extraordinarily difficult. But here is Carney's calculation. And it's the calculation of a man who spent 2 decades managing global systemic risk at the highest level. The risk of total dependence on one trade partner who has demonstrated willingness to use that dependence as a weapon is greater than the risk of managed, diversified engagement with an adversarial power. You don't put all your deposits in one bank that has already shown it might freeze your account. By diversifying, by signing deals with Indonesia, India, the UAE, the EU, the UK, and yes, China, Canada is constructing something more valuable than any single agreement. It is building optionality, the power to say no, the power to wait. And as Carney told reporters when pressed on Canada's U.S. dependency, there is a misimpression by some of the degree to which we are reliant on the United States. Yes, it is our biggest trading partner by far. We are also their second biggest trading partner. There is a symbiosis between the two, a symbiosis, not a dependency, a relationship where both sides need each other. Washington spent the last year telling Canada it was a subordinate customer. Carney just handed Washington a mirror. Everything now flows toward one date, July 1st, 2026. That is when the mandatory 6-year review of USMCA begins. And the stakes could not be higher. Canada's own chief trade negotiator has called it a checkpoint, not a cliff, meaning the agreement does not automatically collapse if talks are incomplete. But the uncertainty itself is corrosive. Business investment softens when no one knows what the rules will be. Supply chains freeze, factories delay hiring. Every week of unresolved status is economic damage, even if no tariff is formally changed. So what are the possible scenarios coming out of that review? The optimistic path is a framework extension. The 3 countries agree to maintain the core of USMCA for another cycle, with side negotiations on the contested issues, dairy, lumber, digital trade, aluminum, continuing separately. This gives business confidence. It unfreezes investment. It is economically rational for all parties. Even Trump, who calls USMCA irrelevant, benefits politically from not being the president who blew up North American manufacturing. The difficult but manageable path is a contentious renegotiation, where some USMCA benefits are conditionally extended while specific sectoral fights continue. Canada has already won several dispute panels under the existing framework. The U.S. has, in some cases, simply ignored those rulings by invoking national security powers. A new framework would need to address whether those rulings actually have teeth, or whether the agreement is, as Carney has implied, currently functioning on Canada's goodwill rather than mutual enforcement. The catastrophic path is a breakdown, where the review produces no extension and the agreement falls into annual reviews, creating a rolling negotiation environment where businesses face endless uncertainty. This would devastate the auto sector first, then manufacturing more broadly. It would accelerate Canada's China pivot, since the logic of diversification becomes overwhelming when the American alternative disappears, and it would impose real economic pain on American states that depend on Canadian trade. Trump understands the third scenario is a threat he can brandish but cannot actually execute at low cost, which means the leverage exists on both sides and to reach something. But here's the critical insight that gets lost in the daily noise of press conferences and Lutnick insults. Carney is not negotiating only for a trade deal. He is negotiating for something more fundamental. The principle that Canada is a sovereign partner, not a subordinate who brings concessions to be granted an audience. The entry fee demand was not primarily about dairy or liquor. It was a test of whether Canada could be bullied into making pre-concessions, because a country that accepts that precedent has already surrendered the negotiation before it begins by saying no. By standing there with his fiscal numbers and his 20 trade deals and his calm economist's voice and saying, "We are not taking notes," Carney was protecting Canada's negotiating posture not just for this summer, but for the next decade. Now let me pull the lens all the way back. Because if you are watching from outside North America right now, whether you're in Seoul or Singapore, Warsaw or Nairobi, Riyadh or Sao Paulo, what you are witnessing between Canada and the United States is a case study that applies directly to you. Every mid-size and small nation in the world is facing a version of the same question Canada is being asked right now. In a world where the largest economy uses trade as a weapon, where old alliances feel increasingly transactional, where the rules-based international order is under what Carney himself called a rupture, how do you protect your sovereignty without provoking a superpower? Canada's answer, emerging in real time, is you build leverage before you need it. You sign deals when you have choices, not when you're desperate. You invest in your own industries, your own defense, your own infrastructure, so that your dependence on any single partner decreases. And then, only then, do you walk into the room and say, "We are not taking notes"? Canada couldn't have said that 3 years ago. It had no China deal, no Indonesia deal, no UAE relationship, no 20 trade deal portfolio, no credible defense buildup, no trillion-dollar investment framework. Without those assets, the bluff would have been called. This is the lesson Carney, the former central banker and systemic risk manager, understood at the deepest level. Deterrence is not about what you say in a press conference. It is about what you have built before you walk into one. Poland built military capacity before invoking its NATO commitments. Taiwan built semiconductor dominance before geopolitical tensions peaked. Canada is building trade diversification before the USMCA review arrives. The pattern is the same. The lesson is universal. And that is why leaders in Tokyo and Berlin and Brasilia are watching this press conference. They are not watching it because they care about Canadian dairy quotas. They are watching it because Canada just demonstrated, in real time, under real pressure, that it is possible to say no to the United States. Not through confrontation, not through recklessness, but through preparation. So let's return to that podium in Ottawa. A journalist asked Mark Carney, "What is the game plan here? Are you comfortable with this awkward status quo?" And he said something that I think will outlast this particular crisis, this particular negotiation, and possibly this particular administration. He said, "Our destiny is first and foremost going to be determined by what we do here, how we build here, not by what Washington decides, not by whether Trump wakes up in a good mood, not by whether Letnick's next insult is more or less diplomatic than the last one, by what Canada builds. That is a profound reorientation for a country that has spent 150 years defining much of its economic identity through its relationship with its southern neighbor. It's not a rejection of that relationship. Carney has been careful about that. He acknowledges the symbiosis. He knows 85% of Canada's trade with the U.S. is still tariff-free. He's not burning the house down. But he is, quietly and systematically, building a second house. And while he builds it, he will not be making concessions to be allowed into a room. He will not be taking notes while someone else dictates terms. He will not pretend that the rules-based order is still intact when his own country's experience proves it is not. He will stand at podiums and answer questions with the precision of a man who has spent a lifetime navigating financial crises, currency shocks, sovereign debt spirals, and geopolitical ruptures, and explain calmly what is happening and what Canada is doing about it. And when the most powerful commerce secretary in the world goes on television and says, "They suck," Carney will not answer in kind. He will answer with numbers. Second fastest G7 economy, best fiscal position, 20 trade deals, $1 trillion of investment catalyzed, $500 billion in defense. Numbers don't get angry. Numbers don't insult people. Numbers just sit there, irrefutable and patient, until the argument around them exhausts itself. Trump called Canada a customer. Carney just showed Washington what happens when the customer finds other suppliers. The door isn't just closed, it's been reinforced. If this video gave you clarity on what is unfolding, share it, debate it. These are the conversations that matter. See you in the next one.